Welcome back to the Project Scola podcast, brought to you by the Philos-Sophia Initiative Foundation, breaking through the barrier of scientific belief. I'm your host, John Trevor Berger, along with my co-host, Brian Murphy. And once again, we're joined today by our friend in Brazil, Professor Raphael De Paola. We're here to talk about the work of Professor Wolfgang Smith and his foundation, the Philos-Sophia Initiative. The Philos-Sophia Initiative aims to facilitate a transformative impact upon our civilization through the recovery of the vertical aspect of cosmic reality based upon the philosophical and scientific discoveries of Wolfgang Smith. The initiative proposes a dynamic outreach to minds profoundly committed to truth, inviting them to an encounter with a comprehensive worldview that integrates the fundamental discoveries of physics into the perennial wisdom of mankind. Dr. Smith's latest book, Physics, A Science in Quest of an Ontology, is now available at philos-sophia.org. It's philos-sophia.org. And you'll find a link directly to the product page itself in the show notes below. The book is available in paperback for $19.95 and in hardcover for $35.95. It's also available in ebook form on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and iBooks, and you can reach those through the product page on our site. Also, if you haven't already, we invite you to watch our documentary film, as always, on the life and work of Dr. Smith, The End of Quantum Reality. Visit theendofquantumreality.com, where you can rent or buy on digital streaming, and you can buy on DVD or Blu-ray. Again, that's theendofquantumreality.com. Finally, we offer annual membership subscriptions to the initiative for $45. Bear in mind, that's about $3.75 a month. And to start off with, you will get a complimentary rental of The End of Quantum Reality, a download to Rick Delano's hit theme song to the film, One Way Up, advanced access to things like this podcast, new articles and other special features, some occasional member exclusive content, and more as time goes by. And once again, you'll find a link in the notes included with this episode to sign up. Now we're going to get back into the interview here. Bear in mind, this is part 2 of episode 2. So if you haven't yet seen or listened to part 1, you're probably going to want to go back and do that before you begin this segment. And you'll find a link to that in the show notes below, as usual. And now, without further ado, let's return to our discussion with Professor Raphael. Enjoy.
Once I was in a school here, explaining these things to professors and teachers and students in the school, the high school. And there came to me a biology professor, and he said, "You don't know anything about animal psychology nowadays. We are discovering a whole bunch of amazing things that lions," he said lions in his intervention, "amazing things that lions can do, and crows." And I watch a lot of those, and I read a lot, not a lot, but some of these, of this literature. And yes, they are, I'm not denying this. But for what you are saying to be a denial or a refutation of what I am saying, it doesn't do that you speak that. You have to bring the lion and let him do the lecture. It is the lion that has to explain.
Because in order to teach, they have to use language, and language involves the use of symbols, which involves conceptualizing abstracts or conceptualizing things that don't exist materially in front of them, let's say. And so
more or less, John Dewey, which passed away a few years ago, is an American philosopher. He made a very good work translating and rearranging the opus of John of St. Thomas, which was a contemporary of René Descartes, which is a Thomistic philosopher. And John Dewey explained a lot what is semiology and semiotics. He distinguishes between these two branches of science, these two sciences. And he's very clear about that. Animals use symbols, but they don't know what a symbol is. They use it at that moment. Of course, they have an expectation of the reaction of the others among its group, and that's why he uses symbols. But he cannot see himself as using something. He's not an influencer. He doesn't feel himself like that. He cannot put himself outside and look the whole situation. In this kind of way, only human beings are capable of abstraction. We extract from extract from a material situation things that were and are and pertain to matter, but without the necessity of the presence of the material objects. That's why they cannot explain things.
One of the things that we're brushing up against here is or maybe not brushing up against it, maybe we're just maybe indirectly is, well, first of all, the principle of form. And obviously we abstract form, and incidentally, we could argue that animals have a, albeit rudimentary, well, the higher animals like lions, wolves, dogs, cats, have a rudimentary kind of intellection because they have visual perception. But as you say, as you say, they lack something, and what they lack, I think, and what enables us, what humans can do, which they can't do, is the act of reflection. Because not only do we abstract, we reflect. We can look back upon what we know, which enables us to form language and to form systems and engineer and say, okay, next time we hunt that gazelle, we're going to get him from that angle instead of this one, because that's why we lost him last time. You know, and there's something in that, there's something in that there's a kind of forms admit, evidently, levels of acquisition. You know, a lion cannot acquire as much of the nature of the gazelle as the zoologist or you or me can capture. And like a mystic can attain even more of the nature of the gazelle. And as you said, you know, agere sequitur esse. You know, that what a thing, action follows upon being. So and I think that's a theme that kind of goes through the entire corporeal strata, you know, because everything from mineral to vegetable to animal to human, and then in humans, even different personalities or humors. You know, we all act following upon what our nature is. And when I say, like with humans, with the humors, personality, there, you know, we all have different personality traits. And, you know, some people are extroverted, some people are introverted, some people are intuitive, some people are more concrete. And this is something which I don't want to say conditions, because I'm not saying that it's impinges upon free will or anything like that, I'm just simply saying that there's a certain set of parameters which really are prescribed by forms, substantial forms, even in, you know, in a human personality that defines a human personality, that that wherein this principle is operative. Like, I can identify in a story what a character might do later based on the things he says and the kind of things he does in this chapter, you know. So anyways, that's just something I wanted to point out, was just that, you know, I think that the key thing there is reflection, and you know, and reflection is a uniquely philosophical act, really. It's intrinsically philosophical, and this kind of takes me back to something you said earlier, which I was going to bring up eventually. Just a comment, you brushed over something about even in the pre-philosophical attitude, human beings recognize the distinctions between the ontological layers, the corporeal strata, the strata of corporeal entities, mineral, plant, etc. And it's interesting because, you know, so that's a that's already pre-philosophical, and yet here we are in basically a philosophical discussion, and we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
But the thing is, that's the thing, and this, so the reason I bring this up is because this bespeaks something about the nature of philosophy, which is the reflection, the reflexivity, the theorizing and thematizing of things that we encounter, the way things appear and the way things behave. And one of the problems in modern philosophy is to try to essentially escape the pre-philosophical truth that's revealed to us by things being what they are, by acting from their being. And as Brian mentioned in our first episode, he said, the modern philosophies, in order to see that way, the way that a lot of modern philosophers do, you have to do a lot of kind of mental acrobatics and stuff. Like, you know, you have to really distort reality.
You need a PhD.
Yeah, well, yeah. It's like, there's a friend of ours. Yeah, well, I won't go into that. Yeah, you need a PhD. The thing about
And by the way, I just realized this discussion is just going to be devastating to all the fans of The Lion King when they discover all the things that lions are incapable of.
well, that's so funny, because I mean, what are we doing with The Lion King is we're anthropomorphizing animals, you know, and
Yeah.
that's one of the things that, and I think that may be one of the things that makes animal stories, you know, so endearing, is because in a certain sense, you know, we want to connect with them in some way. We feel that the animal nature in us, I suppose, because we do have part animal, part intellective. But I did want to mention that that there was something that Chesterton said about modern philosophers. This is finishing my point from a second ago. You know, one of the things characteristic to everybody from, you know, Nietzsche to Hegel to Bergson, whoever, he said, you know, that all these guys have in common is just they will sort out all of reality for you if you just allow them if you just grant them this one twist of the mind. Just allow them this one little caveat that will change, you know, to like for instance, Kant's maybe, you know, if you're in the Cartesian dilemma, you know, if you grant Kant his distinction between phenomenon and noumenon, you know, the thing in itself and then my own mind or whatever, well, then now he can sort out reality for you and everything will make sense. But that initial twist is a distortion, you know. So that's all a mouthful, but hopefully related to what you've been talking about to a certain degree.
Raphael, quick question. How would you answer the objection that, well, the reason the lion is unable to achieve this sort of cognition is because they lack certain aspects of, let's say, the brain. Maybe they don't have a frontal cortex, and that's the reason that if they just evolved over time and developed a frontal cortex, then this would they would be able to do these things. So I guess the evolutionist or the Darwinian objection to this argument about forms, that it's a mental, it's a function of the brain.
Well, as Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas, all of those realists in philosophy say, human intellection starts in the senses. Even higher sciences, mathematics, for example, I cannot imagine a mathematician that is blind, that is has no sense of, has no tactile sense, there's no sense of touch. He would do no science at all. So these things, the intellection builds on sense perceptions. We are still animals, but we have a further and higher, much higher capacity, which does not reside, and that's the closing of this discussion, does not reside in a corporeal organ. Because corporeal organs are capable, like the eye and the skin and etc., the ear, they're capable of capturing things here and now, right? But intellect, the first act of the mind, as Aquinas used to say, is the establishment, is the consciousness of things existing without our presence. We know all those things we talked about here exist without our presence. Even if we didn't exist, things would exist. Those things would be there, right? This ability to understand that reality, as Xavier Zubiri, which is a Spanish philosopher, and many others along that line, say reality only exists for human beings. John Dewey says that animals feel their environment here and now. They are capable of doing that, but they don't have, they will never acquire the concept of things existing without their presence there. And we as childs, we see the behavior of children, of very young children. When we put a blanket in front of us, between us and the child gets nervous. It doesn't know if you're there or not yet. It is all, and that has a connection with the acquisition of language too. The young child, when he hears his mother saying, "I will warm up your milk in the oven. Mama is going to do that for baby, ta 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 ta." Until some age, all the child perceives is like an animal. Mama, zzz, and noise. Milk, zzz, noise. Oven, maybe. He understands. But
My wife would
more-
say sometimes that that applies to me as well.
but at the age more or less of 4 or 5, the child perceives that every little bit of the conversation has a meaning. And that's the age in which the child starts questioning things. What is oven? What are the prepositions? The learning of prepositions in language is a very intuitive on the one hand, but very difficult acquisition for the children. Because all those things that he thought was pure noise among significant units, now he perceives that everything there in the discourse makes sense. And he starts questioning. It's the age of questioning. The question about evolution, we don't know, I don't know, if we will find eventually an extraterrestrial life, right? And if we find it, it can be very intelligent life. It can be very different organically from human beings. Can be. We don't know. The possibilities, let me loosely speak, possibilities of matter, combinations of things like that. But metaphysically speaking or philosophically speaking, if we find a green ET from Andromeda Galaxy that can develop a conversation with us in not in biological terms, but in philosophical terms, we would have to say this is a rational animal. It would fit into that category, right? Artificial intelligence. I don't know if this kind of apprehension that we call intellect is able to develop in circuitry, in semiconductors. I don't believe, but I don't know. Let me be honest here. But once it develops, if it happens, we wouldn't have to say, well, this is a, or this being has intellect.
Well, it's interesting you brought that up because, John, you probably remember this better than I do. I think, was it Bruno Berard who authored an article on the Philos-Sophia website addressing this very issue about artificial intelligence being misnamed? It's really artificial reason.
Yes.
If then. It's always an if then scenario. And John, you gave me a book a while ago. It's a terrific book by Josef Pieper, which was Leisure, the Basis of Culture is what it was called. But in that very chapter, like in the very beginning of the book, like Wolfgang, he makes the distinction between reason and intellect, that they're not the same. Reason is that thing that occurs in time, is discursive thought, and intellect is instantaneous. It perceives, it knows, and it's closely associated with being. And so there's one thing, and I think it was Roger Penrose who said what computers can't do is understand. And so interestingly, there was a friend of ours brought up this issue, because AI is all the rage these days, right? With AI, ChatGPT or whatever it's called. And then Google has their own, which apparently is having some problems. But he brought up the issue with self-driving cars is they would go into an intersection and they couldn't turn left in the intersection because they couldn't distinguish between, let's say, a bird or another car or some other potential threat. What human beings can do when they approach an intersection is intelectively distinguish forms, and an AI machine can't do that. And so these cars would make just continue doing left turns. It would go into the driveway and come around and keep doing left turns over and over and over. Because it couldn't make a left turn in the intersection, it would keep rerouting itself. But
I was just thinking, this point with since it came up, kind of connecting it back to what we were talking about earlier, this distinction between sensation and perception, and then furthermore, reflection. So can a computer I mean, I think the thing with AI is like the only way, we're gonna have computers taking over the world, the Skynet scenario, is if computers can make their own new symbols. Like in other words, are computers in the same situation as the animals, so to speak? Well, not the same situation because we didn't make the animals, but the thing about it is that computers don't have sentience. Presumably, AI doesn't have sentience. AI doesn't have perception. AI doesn't have reflection, or at least that's rhetorical. I mean, as far as I know, I don't see how they could. And if they can't, then they're not. Then again, as Bruno said, they're really AR, artificial reasoning, and the only the intelligence behind AI is the intelligence of the programmer. And incidentally, there was something I just wanted to make this is backpedaling a little bit, but I just wanted to make a quick, interesting point about something Raphael said about how, an animal, we've been talking about lions. So the lion being aware, I think it was maybe it was John Dealey or John of St. Thomas who was talking about this that you were quoting. I'm not sure, but the AI, the AI, I'm sorry, the lion is aware of his environment. He's in the here and now, and that again bespeaks to the notion that there must be some sort of perceptive, intellective principle, form acquisition. In other words, animals, they're more than merely sensory beings, because they and in a sense they live in a kind of they live in a mitigated, restricted, let's say, avaternal intellective, well, I wouldn't say intellective, but avaternal sort of now, in a sense, because they've just got that perception of the environment. But obviously they don't theorize, they don't reflect. So it's an interesting thing. And I'm cheating a little bit because I'm sharing some ideas that are kind of riffing off some things that I've discussed with Wolfgang, and he hasn't written about these things. So I'm not gonna. So I don't credit Wolfgang with any of my wrong-headed ideas. Should they be so wrong-headed? But
Disclaimer.
but yeah, it's a disclaimer. Yeah, but it was Wolfgang who did bring to my attention that this mystery about animals. That that he said the higher animals have visual perception, and he said it follows from the mere having of visual perception that there's an intellective principle at work, because that's it's by intellect that we grasp forms. So in any case, as far as AI goes, I don't know the answer to this, but I strongly suspect that it's true that they don't have sensation, they don't have perception, and they can't reflect. And in a sense, they're kind of in the place. They only allow what humans will allow them to do. And part of that is learn, maybe algorithms allow them to learn things, but the internet apparently is their constant source. But the
I
point
guess
is,
the nature is what does that learning entail? Because I
yeah,
was just thinking about this because that's a great point that AI can only know what the programmer lets it know, or what's programmed into it. And but also what AI does in terms of quote unquote perception is really just measuring. It's measuring dimensions, right? So it's a reduction into number, but our reality has more than just number. So the self-driving car that approaches the intersection, it has sensors that can measure objects in its environment, but it can't distinguish one form from another. So it can detect motion, but it's just movement of measurable objects in space and time, but it can't tell you what that object is necessarily. It can, I suppose it could reach into a database and say, oh, these dimensions might be similar to a bird or a car, but it doesn't know what a bird or a car is. It only knows measurements. And so
Right.
I think that's another important thing about AI is that it doesn't see, it only measures.
Right.
And
And yeah. I think that, and I think that this, we kind of set up a dichotomy here between computers, the computer kingdom and the animal kingdom. And in between, we have the human the anthropic kingdom. And what's unique to this, as Raphael, I believe, wants to get into, is in fact culture. And culture, as in the book that Brian referenced, Leisure, the Basis of Culture, is essentially a book about the nature of philosophy. And philosophy and culture, true culture, are well, you could almost argue that they're potato, but I think there are some distinctions though. But nevertheless, I think that we have this, there's a uniqueness emerging above the animal and outside of the domain of the tech world. There's something, by making these distinctions, we can see more clearly that human nature has something very unique that none of these others have.
right. And Raphael, I just want to add this quick. Raphael brought up the description of AI as basically a circuit board. And so the AI person, the AI designer, conceives of the human brain or human mind as merely circuitry, a circuit board. And clearly, if we're going to get into developing culture, a circuit board needs, we're missing something in that equation, obviously. If the human mind has to be something more than just a circuit board or circuitry.
Yeah, I agree with all you said. I would say that the technology, every kind of technology that we humans make, they either do things that humans do with better efficiency, but they do this in a non-human way. You build something for just one purpose. And that reminds me of a development that Robin George Collingwood, which is a philosopher, an English philosopher of 100 years ago, idealist, British school. And in his book, The Idea of Nature, he said the following: there is a contradiction in the mechanical vision of the world when we try to speak of things in mechanical terms without noticing that any machine, which where the word mechanics come from, every machine is made for a purpose. So a mechanical world is, by definition, a world of purpose. But it's not how philosophers and scientists think of it nowadays. We are machines of some kind. They see us as machines of some kind, all of nature as machines of some kind without purpose. This is contradictory to the notion of a machine. And when scientists want to explain to a larger audience their whole science, they appeal, for example, the evolutionists all over the time, they appeal to notions of function, of adaptation, which means to be apt for something. They cannot brush away the concept of function, of final purpose. And then in their technical papers, they may elude those concepts. But to get a real grasp of what they are saying, they have to recur to final causes, material cause, formal cause, the four causes of Aristotle: efficient cause, material and formal cause, which were the two that we more or less touched here, and final cause. So when we have to explain things, not just describe, even the most mechanical conceptions nowadays, they have to appeal to Aristotelian philosophy, or to concepts there. We cannot do any explanation without those concepts. Things don't get explained. And I would like to come back just to finish some points to culture. Animals, the irrational animals, although all their generations live in the same way as the previous generations. Tigers, for example, nowadays live in the same way as tigers 10,000 years ago. They do the same things. They don't develop systems of symbols which characterize human beings, which characterizes culture. Different cultures and different parts are, what is culture? Is a system, more or less, a system of symbols that can be interchanged, that can be changed. Some generation finds the symbolic system of the previous generation somehow bad, and they change some symbols. They talk about the same reality into different terms. That and we don't see animals developing different generations from the other ones. What makes us possible of doing this in the human nature, in the human community, is the apprehension, the intellectual apprehension of what a symbol is. Animals do have symbols, but they don't know what a symbol is. That's one point. Another point that John made was that we have different kinds of capture or grasp of forms. That is perfect. It is there. But moreover, there are different kinds of forms. There are sensible forms and intellectual forms. Animals are capable of grasping sensible forms. And to make a distinction between materiality and immateriality, which we recognize at once, let me get a material object, like an apple. Either I eat the apple, either I have the apple, or I give it to someone else. We could divide it into two pieces, but the piece that I gave to you, I am deprived of, right? But that's not what happens in any conversation between human beings. When we teach something to someone else, or even when we just relate something that happened earlier today in a normal conversation, the other person gets what you said without you losing it. That characterizes, that is a specific mark of immateriality, which is a kind of dimension, let me use that word, of reality that we have access to, and that animals don't seem capable of.
The publicness of truth.
Yeah. And anatomist or a mechanical philosopher or a scientific belief nowadays could say, and they usually say, the following. But those essences or forms that we attribute to things are not really in the things. They are inside our mind. And we throw those nets, those conceptual nets, to the world, but those forms are not in things. Well, there is a very easy answer to that in terms of what we are saying here. If that was true, where would the notion of mistake or error come from? If I see a camel and I mistake it for a horse, how is it possible to say that I am wrong? Because we understand that the horseness or the camelness of the camel is not only in my mind, but it is in the camel too. Otherwise, the notion of mistake or error would be impossible. And it's with us every day. We do mistakes. When I say that humans are capable of grasping the nature of things or the forms of things or essence of things, well, that's not an automatic process. And we can make mistakes, and we do really make mistakes every day, many times. But is it or is it not a mistake? Where does the notion of a mistake come from? It's because besides being in your mind, there is also a reality of the form in the thing. Otherwise, we could not say that we make mistakes. It would not be a mistake.
I want to bring up something in that you mentioned about purpose, or function as it relates to culture. So the term leisure is where we get school off from, right? So what does that mean? Well, that's the time spent doing something for the sake of that thing itself. So just studying in order to learn, in order to gain knowledge. This is something that animals don't do, right? They do things for a specific purpose. They play. The play is sort of a simulation of their instincts of hunting and so on. Even not discounting the fact that they do experience a certain amount of joy, let's say, but in terms of culture, it's just interesting to the one thing that makes us more human are the things that we don't do that make us more animal, or that we do that make us distinct from animals. So writing, poetry, music, dance, however you want to, these types of creating sculptures, creating paintings, these are the higher, the more we engage in those things, the more human we become. And the less we engage in those things, the less human we become. So really, leisure or schola, the study, contemplation, are those things that make us more human. And I think that's been lost in our sort of technocratic world, where everything is devolved into function. If you're not being productive in terms of creating economic activity that grows wealth somehow, then it's time wasted. And in fact, whether you're talking about a religious liturgy is something that to someone purely it's really a waste of time. To the person who's looking at does this function serve any purpose of progress, so to speak? No, it's something that's stuck in the past. It's so anyway, that's just something that came to mind when we were talking about purpose, how animals do things with purpose, but they don't do things just for the sake of doing them, let's say.
Right. Yeah, and that is really the key about what we call culture and the liberal arts. I mean, liberal arts. I mean, like from liber, free, I think, I can't remember who it said defined, I think defined philosophy, or no, well, defined the liberal arts, and it probably sort of taking liberal arts and philosophy is the highest of the highest stratum of the liberal arts, saying that, the liberal arts are the arts of a free man. That's why they're the liberal arts. And what's best about us is it's really, in fact, the most useless. And what's the most useless is philosophy, which is one of the things that gives me such antipathy toward the contemporary establishment philosophy in the academic world, is that they are trying to make it more like science. They're trying to make it more functional. As a matter of fact, tangentially, I'll just mention my alma mater was Georgia State University. And to this day, from the time I first went there, like 20 years ago, to this day, their pitch on, why major in philosophy? Well, it's because, philosophy majors get great jobs. Employers tend to like philosophy majors and think they write well, and they solve problems really well. And it's like, this is what to tell your parents why you're majoring in philosophy and all this. It's all been reduced to functional, being a functionary of some kind, and that in itself, and it's like, this is supposed to be the philosophy department, and this is really a betrayal of the spirit of philosophy, true as such, as a true philosophy, a love of wisdom, and which, as Aristotle said, of first philosophy, we sometimes call it, we usually call it metaphysics. Is it's the highest of sciences, and that it's valued for as an end in of and for itself. And it's the one, it is a science that directs all the other sciences. It's like, if there's something that can be ruled out on metaphysical grounds, well, then you will not be able to find it. You can save yourself the time of trying to find it in the lower sciences, because it won't be there, or you're going to have to do some mental acrobatics to make it all work. Mental acrobatics, as Brian says.
There is a division, more or less established in philosophical discussions between the role of science and the role of philosophy, which to a certain point is not bad, which is that science makes us discover new things the way it is nowadays practiced. Not always went that way, but in the last 400 years, you have to be productive and producing new things, new theories, and etc. And the role of philosophy is to understand. At first, it is not very bad. And in fact, this whole talk that I used to give about matter, form, animals, vegetables, and etc. I see that people in the audience got really impressed of how many things they understand now. They are capable of understanding. But we do not aggregate any new data. It seems that science nowadays is preoccupied with producing new data, new information, but not new knowledge. And on the one hand, this kind of talk that I give make people completely astonished. Well, I never thought that in a 40 minutes talk, I could understand so many things. But on the other hand, it causes a bad impression, because we are used nowadays to attend to lectures and courses, mainly lectures and seminars, in which the lecturer, the speaker, talks about many things that you do not understand. You already expect not to understand everything there. That's because really things got very much specialized nowadays. Knowledge about science nowadays got really specialized. The discussions are very alive, and we are not sure of anything. Moreover, we get out of the classes and seminars and lectures and talks with the impression that there are a whole world of things that we do not understand and will never understand. Because in order to understand everything that the speaker said, we would have to engage in a 2 or 3 year studies of specialized things in order to understand what he's saying, or at least to grasp the elements, the data. And people feel sad every time they come out of a speech like this, because they just consider science, or they only feel confident in the speaker if the speaker talks about many things that we will never understand. This is how nowadays we feel confident, and people are not used to get out of a talk understanding things. We tend to see nowadays those philosophical talk with suspicion, because it didn't enter into our minds, any new information. We're just rearranging things. Well, but that's the modern scene nowadays. But which I will sum up in this. It's normal nowadays to know things without understanding them quite well, right? And we feel that science, the scientific world that in which we live and in which we engage our careers and our professional lives, is like that. Nature is simply like that. It is normal that we do not understand many things. All right, but what sense is there in saying that you know quantum physics if you don't understand the concepts, for example, the work of Professor Wolfgang Schmidt? What is it really that you know about quantum physics when you do not understand it? What is the meaning of saying that you know that? And in a minute later, you get those potentialities, for example, that are in which we describe equations, the potentials for the particle being observed here or there, and etc. We come out of those lectures and say, and imagine infinite world of, or as we say, multiverse theory. So you do not understood that. You just got the equations, and you can operate well with that at most. But if you come out of there, believing in a kind of multiverse theory, you do not grasp it. You do not understand what it is.
I wonder, Raphael, since you brought this up, is there anything that you would like to say regarding Wolfgang's latest work. You, of course, wrote the encomium that we have printed on the book. And I wonder if you, for the audience, might have sort of some, because what Wolfgang talks about this book is precisely what you were just talking about, you know, understanding physics, you know, having a not just a knowledge, but an understanding, and how his work makes sense of quantum theory, which you can vouch for as a physicist who also thinks about the nature of physics. So if you have any thoughts you want to share on that, and the book, of course, for the audience is the title is Physics, a Science in Quest of an Ontology.
Well, it really is in quest of an ontology, yeah, because how could I approach it? Well, in distinction from Newtonian physics, which supposed things or chunks of matter that were indestructible. Can you imagine that? Something in the some part of them in the material world that will never be destroyed, that doesn't pass through substantial change. There is a hypothesis of things that are not destroyable. That is a field perfect for describing in differential equations that relate small chunks of small pieces and adjacent parts of time, of space, and what will happen in the next future, right? But once the study of the matter, let me use that word, once you start up breaking matter, whatever matter, that's something I would like to talk. Yeah. What is it that physics apprehends in the real world? I will give two examples. For example, if you punch someone in the face, right? What are Newton's law capable of describing in this event? Well, a chunk of matter hitting another piece of matter, and depending on the mass and the velocity and the direction, you calculate the previous state, you know the previous state, put into the equations and find the final state, that billiard ball world of Laplace, Marquis de Laplace, right? Well, regarding Newton's third law of action and reaction, we could either say that I punched him in the face or he hit my hand with his face. That means that we are abstracting from the concrete situation things that are mathematically describable. We are not regarding the real things that participated into the event. A second event, as sometimes I say, as now we spoke about mineral, vegetable, animal, and human layers in the hierarchy of the ontological world. Suppose you were going to drop out of the window a stone, a plant, a cat, and a baby, all of them with, let me say, 3 kilograms. What does Newton's law capture of those happenings? They will abstract everything, the essence of these things, and describe the event only in terms of mass, distance, maybe shape, height, gravity, and a few others mathematical concepts. But was it that truly happened? No, because either you are dropping a rock or a baby. They're completely different things. And the Newtonian would respond, but I'm not interested in that. But I would respond, but these things are there. You may be not interested, but that's because you're abstracting things that maybe if you do your work really well, maybe are in the things, but are not the things. The thing is a baby, the thing is a rock, the thing is a cat or a plant. So this is to understand the work of abstraction. You are abstracting from a real concrete situation. I think that a good terminology to understand what sciences are doing is that you abstract from the concrete. We are creating a physical world, as Wolfgang Schmidt said, out of a corporeal world. What really exists and we witness with our, not only with our senses, because the senses can capture some forms, the sensible forms of things, but we are capturing intellectually the substantial forms of things. We cannot measure those intellectual graspings. We cannot measure those substantial forms, but that is a fault, not of reality. That is a fault of your method. Your method is dictating a kind of abstraction in the concrete world. And that's what sciences are doing all day. We are abstracting things. If we do our work really well, the concepts that we attribute to things, if we do the work well, are there, but they are not the things themselves. So we have a kind of philosophical twist here. Modern philosophy tends to bring back to our mind everything that our senses seem to tell us about the concrete world. No, the qualities, as Democritus said, the qualities, the sound, and etc. They're not there. They're in your mind. And you put that out in order to see if we can grasp something of reality. Well, that is not normal knowledge. Normal knowledge is more or less like we explained earlier. But that is precisely how normal science is done. Really, normal science is a kind of fabrication of mathematical concepts. We attribute them tentatively to the world and see if the equations describe statistically well the happenings in the real world. So they are, I understand the position of the first modern philosophers. They were seeing the new science born in Newtonian physics and electromagnetism, and you can be struck by that. It's completely understandable that. But because of the way you do nowadays science, which is precisely in this way, you abstract things, suppose many other premises, and attribute to matter some qualities, quantitative qualities, that is something that we do not approach today. You attribute to matter and then see if that happens. But that is not normal knowledge. This is scientific knowledge, as we understand science nowadays. Then, because of this way of, this modern way of conceptualizing the world, you're trying to leave out of consideration, you're trying to dump out everything that you already knew before you became a scientist. We are reverting. That's why trying to build a Weltanschauung in scientific terms ends up being an ideology, as Professor Wolfgang reiterates. Because you suppose that the only way of knowing that we have is the scientific one, which is a lie.
This is what
Yes.
Wolfgang calls the world as conceived by the physicists. So he makes this distinction between the physical world and the corporeal world, which is the world in which we actually live, which is full of qualities, sound, color, shape, and which incidentally is why the documentary is named The End of Quantum Reality, because there is no quantum reality in essence. Like, we don't live in that world. We live in a corporeal world. The quantum so-called world is a world conceived by physics, but not the actual world.
Yeah,
Right.
I completely agree with that. Conceptualization of Professor Wolfgang. This for me was, and when I told Olavo, this was in 2010 when I went to Virginia to attend to a course by Olavo. I said, I've just finished the translation. Oh, he said, wow, wonderful. Let me see a little bit of the translation. Well, okay. And then after the interval, he came up with, before the recording started again, he said, what do you think is the most important thing Wolfgang said in that world, in that book? And instead of letting me answer, he jumped in and said, is it not the distinction between physical world and corporeal world? I said, that is the point.
Yes. I've always said personally, and I found this from experience with our dealings with people online and our audience, I guess you could say, that most of the people who don't understand Wolfgang or think he's talking nonsense or something, you come to see very quickly that they simply do not understand the distinction, what I call the distinction with the capital D, the distinction between the physical and the corporeal. If you don't get that distinction between the corporeal object X and its associated physical object SX, which is this, but without any of the qualitative parameters and without a substantial form.
Yeah.
You know, like everything you can fit in an equation is here, and it's real, but it's derivative. And that's and you know, I agree that's that's very pivotal. And what and the brilliance about it too, which I only recently realized, is that he lets the physicists keep the physical, so to speak. He lets them keep saying, okay, yeah, you can have the physical world, right? There is a physical universe, but that's not what I'm talking about. You know, but the world we live in is not the physical universe, you know, or more technically, the world we perceive is not the physical universe. I do not perceive F equals ma in play. You know, I mean, I can think of it while I'm or do the calculation of what's going to happen or whatever, but no one's ever perceived a quantity.
I was on a podcast yesterday with Wolfgang. He was on a show with a gentleman out of the Netherlands. It was called Asking Anything, and he was asked about this notion of because he was asked, you know, that Wolfgang says that quantum particles don't actually exist, right? And what he meant by that. And he went on to explain what you were saying about the notion of X as being the corporeal object, the one that we perceive. We can call it X, but it does have a subcorporeal aspect to it. Let's say the atomic aspect, the measurable, that's real. But so atoms are real, so to speak, but only real insofar as they partake of X. And I think this is such an interesting notion that prior to corporeality, they are in that realm of probability, of potentiality, potency. And as soon as they are measured, it's as if the measuring device, because it's not a quantum system, it can't be, otherwise it wouldn't collapse the wave function. It instantaneously eliminates the probability into certainty. But what is the atom apart from the measuring device?
Yeah.
It doesn't have an existence apart from the measuring device. And this is very troublesome to us, because we can't conceive of things that don't have essence, even and so that quantum particle, or the atom, exists only insofar as X exists. If X does not exist, there is no quantum particle. And this is that verticality, that being comes to us vertically, not from the bottom up. And I think you alluded to this earlier, Raphael, where Heisenberg fell short in his philosophy, where he recognized that, yes, quantum particles are potency. They're somewhere between being and non-being, and reminiscent of Aristotelian potentiae. But then he sort of threw in the towel and said, well, I suppose if you just put enough of these together, they'll amount to something. And Wolfgang recognized that as a fatal mistake, because it doesn't matter how many potencies, it remains just that potency until it's brought into act, and it's the measuring device that brings it into act. But it doesn't exist. There's no atom existing apart from the measuring device. In a sense, it's taken up into the measuring device as a reading on a dial or what have you. It's the measuring device that gives it form. And you might even say, like, you and I we have form also as living entities, and we do have an atomic aspect to us. There's carbon and nitrogen and oxygen, but we're not composed only of that. It's our being, the essence of us, that actually informs those atomic particles into this living corporeality.
They're literally elements of the
perfect.
body, because they're carbon and all this. These are periodic elements, and it's the same with the classical elements. You can, if you think of it from the pre-modern chemical or physical paradigm, it's the same thing as thinking of them not as elements, aren't substances, they're literally elements of a substance. Something just really quick with what you were just saying, Brian, is the thing about the way people see things today is they think that if we go outside of the laboratory, that there's a whole world down there, a quantum reality at the bottom of everything. In other words, they think that if the experimental physicist isn't working, that there is still going to be a bunch of particles there and waves. But in fact, without those measuring instruments, there is no quantum anything.
Yeah. In a really illuminating sentence by Professor Smith, it is not the atoms that give being to the instrument or to the corporeal object. It is the other way around. Right. It is the corporeal world which gives existence, atomic existence, only when it's measured in the starting point of the experiment and then at the end point of the experiment. In between, you have to describe, at least this is the what the theory says itself. You have to describe them as potentialities, as a wave function that mixes many different potencies for the end result.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. We do hope you liked it. Just a reminder, Dr. Smith's latest book, Physics, A Science in Quest of an Ontology, is now available at Philos-Sophia.org, and you'll find the link directly to the product page in the show notes below. And once again, the book is available in paperback, hardcover, and ebook. Also, if you haven't already, Once again, we invite you to watch our documentary film on the life and work of Dr. Smith, The End of Quantum Reality. Visit theendofquantumreality.com to rent or buy on digital streaming or to buy on DVD or Blu-ray. Again, that's theendofquantumreality.com. You will also find in our shop a CD of the masterful soundtrack to the film by Richard Delano. And you can also listen to that pretty much wherever you like to get your music from on digital streaming. And once again, finally, we offer annual membership subscriptions to the initiative for $45. And that gives you a complimentary rental of The End of Quantum Reality, link to download Rick Delano's hit theme song to the film, One Way Up, and advance access to things like this podcast, new articles and other special features, and so on. Please, once again, confer the show notes below. And be sure to subscribe to the Project Schola podcast to tune in next week for part 3 of 3 with Professor Raphael De Paola. One more to go. See you then.
In the words of Albert Einstein, there is no solid ground to build on, but the builders keep on